Welcome, Mahvish and Virginia. Thank you so much for joining me here today. And really, it was just an informal conversation for the three of us. And I just wanted to kick off to talk about March and celebrating International Women's Day. We're going to be introducing a theme of inspiring inclusion and the importance of inclusion in today's world, celebrating women's achievements, raising awareness and discrimination, and to take action to gender parity. So this is a continuation of WISE, and this is very much all about women inspiring success and empowerment. It's a power of storytelling and hearing your journey, Mahvish, hearing your journey, Virginia, and how we can help other women through their through their journeys and their careers. And it's very much about changing the future for females, contributing to shaping an inclusive environment in all, and also to help successful women further their professional ambitions, know your value, and be your authentic self. And it's through these conversations that we can build up and power up our professional networks with others doing just that and building that community. So thank you so much. Would it be helpful, Mahvish, if you just introduced yourself, please?
Yes, thank you so much, Linda, for having me here. I'm Mahvish. I work for Ferragamo in United States. I'm the Senior Vice President for the HR and organization for Americas. So I have a couple of regions that I'm responsible for as part of my scope. I have developed a career. Like, I don't think you find many people who say, "Oh, I dreamt of being in the head of HR for, when you're growing up." But I've developed a career. I've kind of stumbled into this career and developed a career, and I've kind of grown myself on this path of being an HR practitioner in this space. And with being an HR practitioner comes all these things that you just talked about, Linda. Like it's a nice inflection point for all of us. Like being in March right now, talking about International Women's Day, being in the Women's History Month, and then also the landscape and the backdrop of it's still like 2024 and we're celebrating Women's History Month, and some of the topics that we are, talking about in terms of belonging and inclusion and feeling like, the voice matters is still a hot topic. And so it's really important that we continue to create these forums that you have created to kind of bring those topics to life. Myself, like my journey has been like, I come from Pakistan originally, and kind of have a typical traditional immigrant story aligned to coming to the United States, and then trying to find my footing through the education pathway, and just kind of found myself to say, okay, if I have a degree, maybe I can figure that out. And in the young mind, that degree was supposed to be opening up doors for me. And then when you kind of get into that pathway, and then you realize like a degree is a good outcome, but there's still many other things you still have to work through. Being a woman of color, it adds another sort of complexity into how do you kind of carve out your journey. And so I experienced all of those pieces as well, kind of figuring out my identity in a new environment altogether, but also figuring out like how do you kind of find your voice that matters, and you find an environment where your voice actually allows you to be who you are. And so I think for me, it's a really important topic that, again, in my capacity as HR leader, I don't want to lose sight of this topic. And so we have a giant responsibility, especially in this current backdrop of, in the United States, laws are changing, and Supreme Court is like bringing up about changes to some of the things that we believed are the core anchors of bringing about this change. So we're experiencing all of that. And as part of my responsibility, I have an accountability actually to make sure that I can work with the leadership teams that I sit on and the tables that I have the ability to sit at, to continue bringing up these topics of women inclusion, women in leadership, women on the boards, women in positions of decision making, because we're still behind. I was talking to someone recently, and they were kind of pushing back on me on this recruitment for like, why am I asking for slate, which should have a, capability first kind of approach, and then we kind of look at the team composition. And I just asked them a simple question like, have we solved for, do we believe that women have equality in our workplace today? Because if we've solved for it, then maybe I can back off, but we haven't. And so we have to stay in this conversation. We cannot back off. So very much, looking forward to having more of these conversations, but allyship matters even more today in 2024 than even from a few years ago, because we have so many things that are happening and environmentally in the political legal landscape that might have a pretty giant impact if we don't get hyper focused on these conversations about equality, about inclusion, about women in leadership positions. And so I'm really excited to be part of this conversation for sure.
Thank you, Mahvish. And Virginia, as part of your introduction, with your incredible career, living in the US, and also working for European or global businesses such as Zalando, now with Flutter, it'd be really interesting to hear your view.
Absolutely. Well, I'm super delighted. We've been talking about having this chat for a while, and it's finally here. And I think there's so much to do and say in this space. I'm originally from Venezuela, and I've spent half of my adult life in the US and in Florida, and now in the UK. And I have worked for American companies at Oracle and Amazon, AWS. A lot of my time has been spent in technology. Then Zalando as the talent director for Zalando, which is an online fashion retailer in Europe that has a big market share. And most recently, I've just moved to become the talent director for Flutter, which is entertainment, which and the UK and Ireland division, which is a completely different sector for me, but still a very big tech component to it. And the entertainment industry in online is actually something that I'm very curious about, because I think it is the way of the future for entertainment. So throughout my career, I've had the experience of also being a woman immigrant that actually I never really saw myself as being held back, because I think I was very fortunate to have lots of really strong allies. And I worked for Oracle, where Safra Katz was the president and of the company, and from CFO moved to president. So I had lots of role models to look at early on, and then obviously moved to Amazon. And I think we've become more conscious about those ceilings, and having a voice, and actually looking at the composition of our workforce. And I think we were talking a little bit earlier before we started the recording that we no longer have to make a case for why diversity matters, right? I think we all know that. And even though it's a bit under attack recently, it's here to stay. I think that we've got a passion for this in our younger generations as well, where they look for fairness and they do want that equality. And I feel like being in the talent space gives us the opportunity to craft those talent strategies where we can work with our business to enable them to make the right decisions in hiring, to hire the right person for the position, but also ensure that they see diverse slates so that they can build the best team possible. Yeah. And I have to say, I've been very fortunate to work with lots of great businesses that support this idea and understand that diversity matters.
Thank you, Virginia. I mean, both of you, Mahvish, your daughter's 21, and Virginia, your daughter's 18, but both in your very influential roles. How would you discuss your role or your role as a role model?
Yeah, and I take that one to heart, Linda. Raising my daughter, in as an United States, and then to Virginia's early comment, there's so much opportunity, and at the same time, you might feel that because you're coming from a different ethnic background, or your gender, or all the other dimensions of diversity that also apply to you, there's still work to be done. So I have been a really, at least in a mom capacity, and then as a leader capacity, and then how do you kind of guide and shape their identity? And so I'm very proud of my 21-year-old. She's studying fashion right now. And she, as Virginia said, this generation like gives me so much hope and optimism because this Gen Z and hopefully beyond, they are naturally wired to kind of be those curious beings. They have the capacity to take on different perspective. They actually invite that debate. They actually invite that input. Versus a lot of us, like at least in my upbringing, you were conditioned to kind of receive a few of those things, and you're not really taught to question that. But in this generation, there's a lot of capacity to receive and debate things. And I think that what I see in my 21-year-old and then her group of friends and the people that I see her interacting with, they have a really strong disposition. They have a really strong voice on what matters to them. She really proudly tells me that she's an upstander, not a bystander. And I really appreciate that perspective. And so every, from her own career standpoint, her own college career right now, and then hopefully in the future, her professional career, but also her presence and what it does to others. I've seen that, from a really young age that my daughter and then her, friends, they're very, very peculiar and actually very sensitive as to what their outcome is from like the impact that they're making on others. And so it's really, again, gives me hope and gives me optimism that this generation will only take this work farther, and they will not be the generation that just kind of accepts status quo and lets it be. And I think that's the hope that we have in this next generation for sure.
Thanks, Mahvish. Virginia?
Similar to Mavish's points, I made a conscious decision. So I have a son and a daughter, and my son's 21, my daughter is 18. And obviously, they're both of Hispanic heritage. They were born in Miami, but they've grown up in the UK. And being a person of color, here in the UK, they're more likely to be taken for coming from India or Pakistan than they are from Venezuela, right? So it's that identity, the culture, right? And I felt that the reason I moved into HR, coming from my business background, is I wanted to learn about this world, to influence it, from my perspective as a leader, but also to understand what are the challenges that they will be facing in the future, and how do I inspire them to learn, to stand up for themselves, but also the responsibility that perhaps my son will have, as a man that most likely will end up in a position of influence, so that, he becomes an ally where necessary. But hopefully, there'll be days where they won't have to think about this anymore, because it'll be business as usual, right? You just hire the right people for the job, and we no longer have to think about whether we have enough women on boards or even in the senior leadership. Um, and I think what I see from this generation is they're naturally curious, but they're so accepting. And for them, the social inequality and injustice are things that they're not willing to stand for silently, right? And I think we've seen this from the moment that the George Floyd situation happened, right? They managed a revolution. You see what is happening on the environmental side, with Greta, managing her generation to go forward and get us to pay attention. So I think, like you said, well, there's hope. But where I feel that we still owe it to them is to ensure that we continue to move the roadblocks when we see things like today in corporate America, or just corporate in general, not just America but globally. We see under attack in the DEI departments. If your job has been, you've been hired to look after DEI, and companies like Disney, and you hear everything that's going on in other parts where women that were hired for these roles are not getting the support, and actually some companies are getting rid of it. I think we do need to ensure that we don't manage it as an agenda item, but we actually manage it from the perspective of a competitive edge, because it is a competitive edge for the business. And at the end, that is what it is. It's not because it's only right to do it, but also because it will translate to dollars in your bottom line. So let's not lose track of that, and let's not ensure that we do not lose the advance that we've made in this agenda, in this topic over the last 10 years or so.
Thanks, Virginia. For myself, I've been in search 27 years, and it's increasingly important to have that duty of care and to make sure that we have that combination of female and males on the shortlist. And as we discussed prior to the recording, as you mentioned, Virginia, you want to be included and be given that opportunity because you're good at what you do and you have the relevant skill set, as opposed to being a female. So in terms of the for you, Mahvish, being Nike, Walmart, Ferragamo, and the same with you, Virginia, Flutter, Zalando, what would you say that the duty of care is for organizations, and maybe talk about the challenges you've faced and how you've overcome them?
Yeah, I think, Linda, to your point, like the duty, I like that phrase, the duty of care, I think is basically the anchor point, right? Like, because, and Virginia was saying this a little bit too, and I truly believe that, like that case study for, like, the case that you put together for diversity matters because it delivers the competitive edge, it delivers the business results that you're after. That stays. I think that's like, we don't have to go and qualify that case anymore, in my opinion. But to your point, the challenge remains is that the comfort level, the patterns. The workplace was not designed for women to be in leadership roles, right? So we're still in this space of, like, 100 years plus minus industrial revolution. Like, we're still finding out, like, okay, what does it take for a woman to be in that capacity? And how do people around that woman in a leadership role take her, leadership and make sure that's impactful. And so I think in my case, like, to your question around like challenges or like accepting challenges or kind of going after challenges, is this piece around, I play a dual role. Like, I'm in the HR seat, so I'm coaching, counseling, guiding, supporting, enabling all day long, right? And then I'm a female leader. And so I kind of like put two hats on, and I lead a team here in Ferragamo. I've led teams elsewhere as well. So that duty of care, the duty of, like, to kind of, support, this is always top of mind for me. But I get to be, I think, in a more of like a privileged role, because not only do I have to do it for myself and make sure that my leadership and my impact is being quantified and valued the way I design it to be, because I'm still figuring out that workspace is not designed for women. So what does that look like for me as an individual? But then also in my capacity as a counselor, a coach to the leadership team that I work with, and my peer group, and that is also an important aspect to how Virginia was saying that we cannot lose sight of our accountability in this space. Like those tough, courageous conversations that make people a little bit uncomfortable, I'm the first one to bring them up. Like, I would continue to bring those up because I think that's my duty of care, to stay true to what you were saying, Linda. And it is challenging at sometimes. You find, like, okay, I'm kind of like coming, my energy levels are dropping because I find myself having a continuous dialogue in some ways, in many ways. But that's the point. Like, you cannot lose sight of this dialogue. This is why these conversations still are as relevant, if not more, than last year or the year before, right? So I think that's the important part, that for me, like, working in pretty global companies and then coming into fashion industry, I'm literally the first person of color, woman of color, sitting on a leadership team in Ferragamo. And it's very exciting, but it's also like, gives me a little bit of a pause to say, like, I representation matters. And I take that very seriously, right? So I'm here representing not just myself as a leader and not as a, as a member to the leadership team that I support and I work with, but I take that duty of care very seriously, because whenever I'm mentoring others, my own daughter or her friends or other people, that is top of mind, and we should not lose sight of that. I think that is the challenge that you kind of overcome on a daily basis, that you should be able to quantify your value and your impact, be able to showcase it in a way that still makes meaningful sense in this work environment, and be able to kind of like, go and influence and enable change where you can, and not stay silent. So staying in the dialogue itself is a battle. And I think I'm willingly and happily staying in that for as long as it takes.
Excellent. Virginia, will you add to that?
So I think the only thing I would add to that is that we can also play an influential role in how our companies address some of these matters. So by providing opportunities, by calling out, right, when we feel that there's a better way of doing things, or when we feel like the discussion is not being productive because it's taking away from the things that matter. And I'll give you an example. I think that um, one of the things that, especially after COVID, right, we became so much more aware of mental health and what is important for us, for our well-being, but also how do you bring in a workplace the opportunity to provide psychological safety, to provide an environment where you've got um, the opportunity to bring your whole self and bring yourself in a way that encourages others, and inspires others. And I feel like we've done a lot in that space, but we sometimes forget how all of these things are intertwined, right? So if you are a returning mother to come back to work, we're very privileged in Europe, because in Europe we do actually get more time off. I had my babies in Miami, so I only got 8 weeks of maternity leave back then, right? I should have moved here first, right? But just things like that, we can't lose, like all of the advancement there. But you want to be able for mothers, to have the flexibility. You want to have them back in the office. Will provide, the nursing rooms, provide, the flexible hours, do the little things that will allow her not to be scared or hide the fact that she has a child, or would like to actually go pick up her daughter or her son, or allow for the father to be able to support, right? So we have a lot of that in Europe, and I think we're seeing more and more in the US. But I think that those are the things that we need to focus on as well. So it is about, just providing inclusion for everyone, and what are the things that matter to people, those little things that we can ensure that, okay, so we do have a lot of women, and we have women in tech, and you feel like you've got the inclusion and you've got the diversity. So what's next? Well, let's make sure we have that sense of belonging, that we promote, we nurture what that experience looks. It might look different for a woman that has children. It might look different for a woman that doesn't have children, but actually needs to take care of parents. Like, let's look at what our reality is today after COVID, and what are the things that people value. So I think that that's kind of, for me, the next thing where I want to challenge and play an important role.
Yeah.
And what advice would you then give to those aspiring female leaders out there who want to break into possibly a more traditionally male-dominated industry?
I would love to take that, because I've been doing a lot of, and I'm sure, Mavish, you are doing a lot of that in the coaching space, right? We have a lot of safe circles, I call them, right? So people say, "Do you have a coach or a mentor?" I say, "No, I have many," and I think the one of the best advice I've been given, throughout my career, because I actually started in law, and then through Allah is we were offered a role in the business side and moved on. Is like, if you have that uh, desire, raise your hand, talk to the people that know you. You would be surprised how many of your male colleagues, managers, directors, people that are out there, will make time for you and help you build that confidence, right? Or help you identify the gaps that you're missing so that you can invest. But be a bit brave. I mean, if you don't have to tick all the boxes, I mean, there's lots of research showing that, if we read a job description, or I don't know, Linda, when you're doing, a brief for a role, and you've got all of these different things, women are very much very cautious about ticking every single box. And our male counterparts are not necessarily, right. They would have, I have 60%,
Very true.
I can do this job. So learn from that confidence. If you have a partner, talk to your partner. How do they deal with situations? I do a lot of my own personal sort of peer coaching with my husband, who, at times I will ask him, "Look, I've got this situation. I want to do this. What do you think?" And you would be surprised how many people are willing to do this. But just be brave. Um, just raise your hand and go for it. I mean, life is too short to, have these dreams that we just don't, right now there's a video circulating everywhere on LinkedIn, right? So the dream gap. And I think, life is too short to have dream gaps.
Mhm.
But do you think that's an extension of imposter syndrome as well, as females? Yeah.
Yeah. No, I was gonna say, Virginia, I think what you said is spot on, because when I look back and if I had to sum up, like, every time there's another voice in your head telling me, oh, I don't think I'm qualified, I don't think I can do it, you almost have to have five other voices to squash that. And so I've been calling, like, who is on your personal board of directors? As women, you almost have to have your personal board of directors that you can have that really safe, vulnerable dialogue with someone to say, I'm thinking about putting my name in the hat for XYZ. What advice would you give? And it's okay to kind of raise your hand, to your point, exactly, because I think that's where women in our own head just tell ourselves to not to even co-consider anything. So if you once you kind of like practice, and it is a practice and becomes a habit of overcoming that, then it allows women to just, again, like, speaking up and then going and making it happen and turning those dreams into realities. It's all doable, and we've seen it happen, but it starts with that piece around, like, just overcoming your own inner voice and just kind of developing that courage and confidence to go after it. And I think I love what you said about allyship. One of the tone, the texture that I have seen, witnessed, and not just personally kind of like gained from it also, and kind of, but also seen it across the industry. And if you talk about corporate world for a second, is allyship is pretty much is an action for the most part. It's not perfect, but it's an action. And I think the spectrum of the allyship is now moving from awareness and education and sensitizing yourself to more like, what do you want me to do? How can I help? And I think it's true for both, by the way, men and male members of the corporate world, but it's also true for women like you and me, like, who are coming in to talk to us about, like, what can that look like for me. So I get a lot of like energy from those conversations, because I think that momentum is really happening. And so allyship being moved to more action planning and having your personal board of directors, for women especially, is the game changer for sure.
Thank you, Marvish. But I'm following on from that, Virginia, Marvish, because you're both mentors, coaches. What role would you say a mentor or mentorship programs play in both your journeys? And what advice would you give for those females out there looking for the right mentor?
So I think that it's building that confidence. You talked a little bit about the imposter syndrome.
Yes.
I wasn't aware of imposter syndrome until maybe 5 years ago, and I guess it's when we've actually been talking about it. And if you look at it, it's it is a bit of that. And for us, we're not Gen Zs. I'm not going to reveal which generation, but I'm not a millennial either. So yeah, I'll leave it out there, right? But for us, we grew up in a sense of hierarchy, and there's this bit of that risk averse of raising your voice, to speak up, and we've had all those books, right, about leaning in and a place at the table and all of that. And I think that is part of that imposter syndrome. Perhaps we weren't confident enough to raise now there's no excuse. I mean, like, I think the older you get, the less you really care about how people see or think about you, but you think more about what matters to you, where your values align, and what are the things you're not willing to compromise, and make sure that in that space you speak up. I would say that the coaching for me, like I've actually just engaged with a life coach. I had some time off and I wanted to do more about planning what the next 30 years of my life would look like, in terms of, like, we, particularly for women, we associate our worth to the role that we play as a woman, as a wife, as a mother, as a daughter, as a friend. And we grow up with all of this guilt because we constantly need to be giving, giving, giving. So I want to make sure that, for the next 30 years, I know how I live with purpose, how I plan what I want to do. And part of that journey is having that personal board of director. I love how you said it, Mavish, but that can change. You've got people that you go for life advice. You've got people that you go for, uh, just when you're feeling down and want somebody to cheer you up because they know they'll always make you smile. but you've got people you respect enormously on the business side, where you can ask, for how do you deal with a difficult conversation? If you're not happy, I mean, I've just changed, roles, and I was very keen on this particular role, and I had a few others, and there were a few people that were really key to me, the pros and cons, and it doesn't mean I couldn't make the decision on my own, but it just means that sometimes you need that additional support to, validate the things that you're thinking about, right? Some of these decisions are important, so don't be afraid to ask. More importantly, don't be ashamed to ask for help, and that's kind of the advice I give everyone. And there's always good people out there willing to share with you a bit of their time, including us, I'm sure, right?
Yeah.
I know that, yeah.
Yeah. I think, Linda, to your question, like I am a purist about the definition and the impact of mentor circles, call them mentor groups, one-on-one mentoring. I think any kind of that program, whether it's structured or unstructured, it works in some capacity. At minimum, what can go wrong? Like you go to someone for some advice, right? And then you kind of like, you don't take it. It's fine, But I think that at minimum, to Virginia's point, it's about asking. Like, it's about reaching out and having that, again, that internal confidence to say, I believe I have a question about it. I'm curious enough to go and ask someone else for their third party, neutral kind of advice on this. And to Virginia's point, most of the people, I think, would be willingly, happily give you that time. And so I believe in those programs. I think either structured or structured. If it's a company organization wide, like, we should have programs that allow people to kind of more, come together, but organically as well for life stuff and for personal stuff and professional stuff. I mean, there's people out there in your circles. If not, then at least make it, again, a point that you have a personal board of directors. I literally, and I'm going to geek out on this, I literally have a spreadsheet with like, which has the personal board of directors for different, areas, but down to like who's doing my nails and where am I going to massage next time. Like it's my whole like wellness piece that I've built for myself that I continue to update, right? So, but at least like do that for yourself. So the service to you to kind of have that like, personal board of directors and other providers that you can go to kind of have that relief and have that conversation, have that what you need in the moment. It's almost a need for women, regardless of what stage of your life. If you're a young mom, different needs, right? If you're like taking care of like parents, as Virginia, like all different stages require different kind of support network. But I think mentorship is a bedrock, and seek it out for sure.
Thank you. Good.
One, I love what you've just said. I mean, we've had this conversation before, Linda, with really, accomplished and successful women, about how important it is to look after yourself, and that is part of it. Take the moment to reflect. I mean, if a friend came for advice asking you for the name of a good carpenter or somebody for some home improvement, even if you didn't have the recommendation, you'll seek that advice for others. But sometimes we just don't take the time to step back and invest in ourselves. And I think that that's a really good practice, and one that we should encourage for everyone.
Listening to both of you, Mahvish, Virginia, and we talk about mental, well, especially post-COVID, mental well-being. How do you both? I mean, you said you have a person board of directors, but how do you maintain that work-life balance in terms of, especially advice to those who are? My mother was a single parent who may not have had that support as well, and you're running, you've got your family, your kids, and trying to balance the two.
Yeah.
What would your advice be?
I think for me, Linda, like, what balance, or like different articles say work-life integration balance, what it might look for you may not look like for me, right? Like, so I think coming to terms with that, like, I had in a previous like opportunity, I had a manager who was literally concerned about my well-being because of my work hours. And that was a concern. And I had to literally like think about that. I'm like, okay, but upon my reflection, my work-life integration and balance is like how I utilize my capacity and how I define that is going to be unique to me, right? So I think, again, going back to that inner work, that's a little bit needed for yourself to say, like, define how you want to use your capability and your capacity, and then kind of like put the equation together of what does work-life balance look like for you. because you have to define it for you, set your boundaries, and so that you can teach others how to respect your boundaries. So unless and until you have a really strong, clear point of view on what those boundaries are, what your needs are, you will not be able to articulate that to either your personal life or in or in your professional setup as well. So I'm a strong believer of like really define what is your capability, capacity look like, that what is that makeup for it? Well, how do you kind of function and operate and utilize your skill sets and your abilities in the best way? And then define your personal boundaries and your professional boundaries and be able to articulate that to others. And that actually the outcome you're looking for is that your optimal or at least close to optimal work-life balance that you're looking for.
Virginia?
I totally agree. I think one thing that I've learned a little bit later in life, and I wish I had learned this earlier, is really how important it is to take care of yourself so that you can be in a better place to take care of others. And again, it could be, it doesn't have to be that you have to have children or a family, or I think you can be a high, achieving individual working crazy hours, and that's fine. If it works for you, that's absolutely fine. But just make sure that you check in, that you're not just filling in your life with work because you haven't had a chance to do some self-reflection and understand what are some of the other things you would love to do. Would you like to travel? Would you like to write a book? Would you like to go on a yoga retreat? I do tell my kids, but I also tell many of my colleagues and people that I work with in my teams, if you want it to happen, put it in your diary like you do with everything else. So the excuse of being too busy, sometimes I don't want to say that it's not okay to be busy. That's fine. Some of us need that energy and need to do that, but make time for things that matter for you as well. Even if it's just 1 hour a week that you take on a Friday morning when you reflect on how the week went and what are you going to do next, and do you have time to plan for a manicure or to call a friend and catch up with a friend that you haven't had a chance to. Those little things are what have actually, Linda, allowed me to have roles where I've actually been commuting on a regular basis to Berlin, with my family in London and so on. A great support network, but also reflecting on myself and how that worked for me. And if at one point it doesn't work for you any longer, make sure you take action, because only you can be accountable for your well-being. People can do things and say things. It's how you let those things affect you, and what do you do about it? And then that's a lesson I wish I had learned earlier, but I'm glad I've learned it nonetheless.
It's interesting. I was looking some stats the other day, and they talk very much about saying 1 in 6.8 people experience mental health problems in the workplace. Women of full-time employment are nearly twice as likely to have a common mental health problem as full-time employed men. So 19.8% versus 10.9%. I don't know about you, Mahvish, Virginia, but regular exercise for me is I try to do that as frequently as possible to maintain that mental that work the work-life balance. But I'm sure that so many other women struggle to juggle that work, motherhood, other responsibilities. So that gender exercise gap is real. Time pressures, intimidating environments, maybe.
I think one thing, Linda, that we women are very prone to is feeling guilty. And I'll give you an example, right? So when I worked for Amazon a week before I started, the role moved from London to Luxembourg. My kids were quite young. My daughter was 9, my son was 12. And I had a dilemma. I really wanted to work for Amazon, and but I was worried. I had a 9-year-old daughter and a 12-year-old son, and my husband was like, "You've wanted to work for Amazon for so long, I guess you just do it." He's like, "I guess it's time for me to step up." And it's very funny, I laugh about it now, but the reality was that he was always willing, but I really never gave him the space, because it was important for me to fill the gap. Like when they were here, I wanted to do everything. I wanted to be the one, going to the games or the choir or whatever, because I felt guilty about not being there. And the reality is it's a partnership. But if you're on your own, also you build your support network and you prioritize what are the things you want to do. we have to learn to let go of the guilt. And actually, again, it goes back to like asking for help. Sometimes we, we feel like we need to be superhumans, and that's okay. That's your journey. You have to go through that. But if this is the reason, I think, I mean, I don't have any data to provide, but I think that is the reason why we experience twice, the quantity of that mental health issue compared to our male colleagues, because we are always taking on so much, and we find it difficult at times. So I would say, um, get some therapy, talk to a friend, read a book, talk to your partner, talk to your parents, to whomever you can talk to, about how do you balance. And if you really want to be present, then be present without that guilt. I think when you learn to manage that guilt, I think it's life changing.
No, you're right, absolutely, and it's very much how we break down these barriers, promote inclusive, accessible, and affordable options for everyone.
Yeah.
In terms of and we've touched on it slightly earlier, but in terms of the DE&I budget, is there one at Flutter or Ferragamo or Nike previously, or Walmart?
Yes, I think that. Yeah,
budget.
Go ahead.
Linda, is that what you said?
Yeah, budgets.
Sorry. Yes. Yeah. Okay. Got it. Yeah. Sorry, Virginia. Please go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that, I think, like I was saying earlier, I've been very privileged to work for companies where inclusion and diversity really matter, and also equity and belonging. And we've had directors of DEI, we've had budgets. I was very fortunate at Zalando to do an upskilling program for women in tech. So women that wanted to get to do the career transition, we supported to get them to upskill in software development. And that was an incredible program that would have never been possible if we didn't have the leadership. Our CTO at the time, then our chief business officer, supported that with real money. Like, he put his money where his mouth is. And obviously at Flutter, we've just celebrated International Women's Day with some amazing events, but they didn't just happen. I mean, the things that I'm seeing at Flutter about the importance of, bringing attention to the women agenda, I think in the industry in particular, it's because we care about these things, and they are seriously part of our, core values as a company. You can't make this up unless, you can pretend, but people will know if you're pretending. So you do need to be serious. And if you've got a head of DEI, but you give them no budget to do anything, then it's like everything else, right? I mean, obviously we have to be careful, and we have to use our money wisely, and we have to invest in a where I think that we need to use these budgets to promote inclusion and diversity, not necessarily to benefit one particular group over others. And that's where the challenge becomes, right? You need to make sure that you're leveling the playing field. But I've been very lucky, and knock on wood, it will continue to do some great things in this space.
Yeah. No, I think to your point, Linda, like in Walmart and Nike, my previous experiences when they're globally established, pretty large scale. So they have the volume and then they have the scale. And so it's pretty established programming that can come out of it, which is nicely funded and it's budgeted and everything else. There's investment strategy behind that work. So in my current space, like Ferragamo, like, we're also in the same spirit. So the philosophy and then it needs to match into action, right? So right now, to like how Virginia was saying, like, I'm really having a great time just standing up those programs, right? Because they don't really exist in that capacity at that scale and the kind of outcomes we're trying to drive. So the ERGs and then, other stuff that we're trying to do in terms of mentor circles and whatnot. I think that is if the philosophies align and you're anchored in the values, and one of the values being like, you want to create the space for belonging for all, then I think the funding just naturally is the next outcome. Like, so if you have the objectives, what are the means, right? You have to kind of quantify the means, and if people are on the same page, that will happen. So I think for me in my current role capacities, it's a more of like the build phase of like what that looks like, and there's energy and excitement around it. And we're just like sort of like, charting that path for Ferragamo's like presence in that dialogue of, again, inclusion and dialogue of belonging, of gender equality and all the other topics that come associated with it. So it's exciting times from just that. Not that the brand is not going through transformation, it is, like many other companies are, but it also this internal transformation of like the brand identity and org identity internally, which is also exciting at the same time. So.
Well, Mahvish, Virginia, is there anything else that you'd like to add before we close?
No, I want to say thank you, Linda, for getting us together. It's lovely to meet Mahvish. I know you've got some interesting challenges at scale, and it's just great to connect. This is also a lesson learned, right? Through our connections, we nourish and build partnerships that can help us continue to grow. Having dialogues like these are so simple to organize, but it's finding the time. So Linda, thank you so much. Also, thank you for the work you do, Linda, with Wise. I think that's a great community, and we'll be doing more in that space with you, and looking forward to what else you're bringing to us that we can continue to contribute. Love working with you.
I absolutely, well, likewise, Mahvish, Virginia, you're right, these conversations are key. It just emphasizes the collective effort needed as we try to achieve that gender equality and inspire inclusion. So let's all continue to champion women, break down those barriers, and accelerate the change we need for a more inclusive and diverse future. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Linda. Thank you,
Thanks for creating
Mahvish.
this space. Thank you, Virginia. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Bye.